So it's, I guess, scientifically proven that people have a fear of growth. And I think that fear of growth, this is like a hypothesis of mine, is attached to that terror management, those cycles of the fear of the unknown, fear of the unknown, fear of the unknown. And the key is don't people, you sit at home and you're like, oh man, I want a giant grandiose idea, whatever, insert it there. And that's daunting. But you could start small, go put yourself in a small situation that puts you out of your comfort zone. Start small and then add to it and add to it. And, read, learn, develop, all the things that you should be doing.
Episode 51 of the Man of Mastery podcast. What's up, guys? It's around about March 54th or something crazy like that, week 4 or 5 of the coronavirus COVID-19 lockdown, depending on where you are. And I just hope everybody is staying safe and strong and fit and using the time or the flexibility to innovate, to improve, to maybe just take a few minutes and think about what life looked like. Make some notes for yourself on what it was like just a month ago, and the kind of things that really in hindsight were unnecessary, unhealthy, unneeded, and just, write those down so you remember them and you make sure not to fall back into those patterns or behaviors afterwards. And equally, write down what's great about what you're doing now, whether it's your daily routine or your hours that you're keeping or your movement, exercise, mindfulness, relationships, connections, just how you're spending your time, quality to hydration, nutrition, exercise, whatever it might be. There's got to be great stuff that's going on that's a positive, and you want to carry those forward. Remember to take those forward and remember to leave behind the stuff that you really didn't need. And it's going to be a new world. What do you want it to look like for you? All right, today's guest, Jeff Depatie, and I'm sure I'm not doing his name complete justice. Canadian name, French-Canadian name originally. And look, Jeff, I don't know if I've ever spoken to a Zen master, but as far as I'm concerned, this is as close as I've gotten so far. I'm sure Jeff would be too humble to say anything of the sort. And, from his resume, maybe it would look like the furthest thing from it on the surface. But first of all, there's no video to go along with this week. Jeff is, all right, let me just read it. This is like a manly man, right? So Jeff's a retired Special Forces, Tier 1 Special Forces soldier from the Canadian JTF-2 unit. He was a sniper assaulter, part of the sniper unit that has the current world record longest shot, trained in multiple disciplines of martial arts, MMA, karate, spears. I don't know what we do with spears anymore. Skydiving, paramotoring, piloting all different types of aircraft, quals on that, professional driving on and off-road, open water scuba, human optimization processes, and that's just what we can know about. Over 50 confidential military courses and qualifications. So this guy he ticks all the buckets, right? But when we get into the conversation, look, usually I do highlights, right? What did I take away or what did I learn from the episode? This one's probably way out of my depth. So what I can really tell you that you're going to learn and you're going to hear about is some of what Jeff does in his mission to really help people grow. And as I called it, human optimization process, how we work together, we develop, we work on self-mastery, we grow as individuals and as teams. And he's got a mission of really to the greater good of humanity and working together from the inside out in solving some of the world's biggest problems. So we hear about an event, might be the wrong word for it, but the process, which Jeff and his wife Jessica and their cadre, their team run once a year for a very select group of men to experience what Jeff calls the ultimate in not only adventure, but personal growth and really the challenge of a lifetime. And then something new they've got called the Trials, which is just now taking applications and will start May 1st. This is a 12-week online, live and video-based self-discovery, self-mastery, deconstruction, discovery, and training for mind, body, and soul. And then Jeff also touches on something else new coming from him and team called the Robust Human Summit. And great time for this. It's sort of about survival, and that could be wilderness related, or it could be in and after a pandemic like the COVID-19 coronavirus situation. But it's not only about survival, but also thriving. All right, so lots to learn in this one. I think you're really going to enjoy hearing from Jeff as much as I did and enjoyed talking to him. So Jeff will do it much more justice himself. Let's jump right in with this week's guest, Jeff Depatie. Jeff Depatie, welcome.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for making the time again. Hey, we got a lot to talk about today. You've got a very, very extensive resume, which I will not bore you with. You know all about yourself. I'll splice that in for the listeners by the time they get to this. But in general, at a high level, so we're going to hit self-discovery, self-mastery, something that is the theme of this podcast, and you hit in some very different ways. But you very succinctly call the human optimization process. So I'm super excited about this. Where to start? You're probably the second guy I've had on in the year now that has such an extensive resume that it's hard to even figure out where to dig in. But just as a couple highlights, so you do have an extensive military background. For American listeners who may not be as familiar, you were part of JTF2, the sniper unit, the Tier 1 group in Canada. And in fact, your sniper unit, I think, currently still holds the world record for the longest confirmed kill at 3.5 kilometers or 2.2 miles for those of us who are metrically challenged. But just tons and tons of experience in all kinds of harsh environments in the world. And I find it really interesting to see on your resume, you're also a Cisco certified network professional. So kind of a long distance threat, whether it's with a gun or with electronics. So very, very varied past. You're also, so I'm just going to start in a kind of an odd place before we bounce back to what you mostly do. I noticed that you have something called the Meraki Collective. Does that go along with what you do as an entrepreneur? And I'm just curious because you're the third person who's used the word Meraki with me in the last year.
Oh, really interesting. That's a good word. I believe it. I'm not great at definitions, but it's, putting all your love and passion to everything you do. Meraki Collective was, as I was transitioning out of the military, I met my wife, Jess, and she's an entrepreneur. She is a marketer. And I invest in real estate, and she needed a place to work. And we found this great place, great deal, beautiful location that we turned into a co-working space, Meraki Collective. Also, the company name that I started purchasing commercial property under. We've since moved past doing the co-working. The co-working turned into an excellent segue into getting people to fill up our real estate. Sometimes it's difficult to fill up commercial space. This was a great way where people came in, started on their entrepreneurial journey, then eventually it blossomed. They would need more space to, do their business, whether it was, we had a chiropractor, we had some online gamers. What else did we have? We had a pastor who started a church, and then a few other ones that filled in the space. So that was kind of Meraki. And then it's not that it fizzled, but we just couldn't stay in the location where it was, in a little town called Smith Falls in Ontario. And then we needed to move on. It was a necessary program. And then, life moved on, and we knew we were starting up the Special Forces experience, and we needed to just thin out our workload.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Interesting stuff. I really picked up on the fact that you guys were not only doing something for yourselves, but as part of the process, part of revitalizing a smaller town. And you mentioned your wife, Jess. Maybe I should have asked to talk to both of you guys. I know you're co-founders and what you do now. It sounds like you have a very complementary mission. So I'm just going to read or cite a couple things that I found. You talk about your mission as bringing men together to collectively solve some of the world's biggest issues from the ground up. And I think I've seen something from your wife that talks about saving the world by saving men, which I thought was a cool, backstory. Every one of us has, that successful woman behind the successful man type of thing. And since you jumped in and mentioned it, Jeff, the process and the special forces experience, let's start with that you co-founded and I think launched, was it last year?
Yeah. Serial One was last year for the process. It's one of those journeys. It's a lifelong journey, right? Most things are. You get to a certain point, and it kind of seems like the world conspired to get you there on purpose, or the universe got you there on purpose, right?
Right.
Met Jess, and she says save men. It's not from a position of like I understand and know better. It's just, and you might agree with this, in this point in time in history, with all our ancient programming and wiring, and you combine that with the modern world, it makes for some interesting psychology and how to manage that interesting psychology, right? We have all these tools that seem to get kind of bottled up. And so when she says that, it's more about under like men working in binary units and bigger, balancing masculine and feminine, et cetera, also giving them outlets, things of that nature. Yeah. So anyways, I was transitioning out of the military, out of the special forces. For the American listeners, our JTF2 is something similar to your Delta Force or SEAL Team 6. It's, as you mentioned, the tier 1 unit in our country. And there was a lot of buckets that needed to be filled when I was moving away. And I didn't want to do government contracting. I didn't want to do military style training in terms of working with police organizations. It wasn't that I have anything against it. That's not where my head and heart was. And the question was, okay, what do I do with all these skills and transition them into the next evolution of my life, the next big change of my life? Because it was around the time I was 35 and things start to happen hormonally. People start to self-actualize a little bit more around that time frame, or move into transcendence. And your goals, your mission, what you want to vector and orientate towards is just different, right? So we started piecing together this project called the Special Forces Experience. It drew mostly on the human selection side of my experience and the optimization side that I gained when I was in this unit. I overlaid more of like the tactical style stuff to test physiology, to test psychology, and to show characteristics, traits, cognitive traits, that kind of thing. And we overlaid it in a bunch of different ways and evolved into what we call the process, which is, it's spread out over a few months. The idea though is that we pick people who we believe are, I don't like using the word elite or next level, but they have their shit together. In a lot of ways, right? They understand themselves generally. They've probably been entrepreneurs or traveled up a hierarchy in a corporate world pretty good. And then we wanted to balance that, of course, because you can't just have, that's usually a guy between 40 and 50. And, that's just one specific man. So we wanted to put a big group of men together. So we even had a young man in Serial One who was 18, but wow, just like super put together young guy. And the idea is kind of, mixing all these people together, different mindsets. We all grow and develop together, right? We all elevate together. And then last year, like you said, we ran Serial One and it went excellent, in my opinion. We did lose a healthy amount of guys within the first couple of days. And I think everyone had a good experience. I say that a little bit kind of humbly. I know everyone had some kind of experience. And that was the idea, that you come, you meet resistance, you meet a wall, and in a way you're defeated, right? Because it's, the obstacle's away. And every time you meet those challenges, you overcome, turn them into opportunities, or, some people weren't able to carry on, especially physically. In order to tire out the mind and psychologically stress the mind, you got to tire out the body, or at least you should. And Yeah, we definitely tired them out.
Yeah, a buddy of mine was in that serial, so I got a brief download from him on it after he and I went and did a much smaller crucible together, a 12-hour overnight thing, and he was one of your older guys. It is really interesting that you kind of get into this 35 to 55 range in your life, and you start to go through those, what's my purpose, what's my legacy, that self-actualization. So pretty impressive that you had an 18-year-old that had it together to even be selected. And I think it's really fascinating from the little bit of discussion I had with Jess last year, and looking at the process on your website, how much of the selection intensity you have, and the psychology to that, as well as the follow-up after the fact. But yeah, in the very, very brief download I got from my buddy, certainly got the message on the physical component. And it's fascinating how the physical really opens up all those other realms, or as I've heard you put it, part of your own personal passion is maintaining peak physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual condition. And it sounds like a lot of that is built into the way that you architected the process.
Yeah. So what we do a selection of the people, as you mentioned. There is a psych portion in that, a little bit of, we'll call it like esoteric spirituality dabbling, to see where someone's at that way. Physically, are you a couch potato or not? I have a pretty good idea. If you're not doing any kind of physical activity, you will never get through it. So, there's all that. There's health issues. Okay, can we bring them into the bush for 8 days and batter their bodies and minds responsibly? And then once that's done, I just want to circle back to the young man. So I wouldn't say they were self-actualized individuals, but if I was to put my money on them as someone who's on the path to something like that, those are, that's why they were picked. And you mentioned your friend, someone like that, if I was 18 and I had one moment to get one nug of wisdom from someone who's already lived another 20 some years on me, give them that opportunity. Yeah. So anyways, chosen. And then if they commit, what happens is they get a file that they start looking at all their life. They have to go to the doctor. They have to get blood work. They have to check in with relationships. They have to check in with themselves. I ask a bunch of questions that send them back thinking about childhood and, the future and all that kind of stuff. It forces them, if they're not, to take it's more than a minute because it takes a while. Some of the physical check-in stuff's like a month and a half just to see how they're living, their well-being, how they're sleeping, all that stuff. And it gives them a chance to really look at themselves. Plus we're gathering info. There's all kinds of back burner things going on, all kinds of little Easter eggs that we plug in there, a little bit of stress tactics and things like that, because that's a very important dynamic in the process, is stressing your fear responses in order to set you up to better metabolize them later on. So meanwhile, the months are passing, they're physically getting ready, they're mentally getting ready while living their lives, right? So now they're living their lives and they've layered on these new stress loads. And hopefully in some of the fine-tooth combing they do, they remove some of the flack, the things that aren't serving them anymore. And then they show up for the 8 days. And the first bit is really designed to overwhelm. I didn't expect it to happen so fast. I expected the way it goes is kind of the highly physically overwhelming portion. And then it transitions. It doesn't get easy. In most ways, it gets way harder. But the content that they encounter slowly changes. So what we are observing, what we're testing, what we're pushing, looking for. And when I say looking for, we're just gathering. It's undirected data mining. There's no point B. It's just to gather as much as we can so that we can start putting together their file for them, a debrief file that doesn't guide. We don't say, hey, you should be more like this or you should be more like that. It's kind of like, from what we could see, this is where you are in this point in time. And obviously the deeper you make it into the 8 days, much more, we gather a lot more on their cognitive traits and their characteristics, the deeper they go. And then afterwards, there's a decompression phase in order to, we don't want people to come and psychologically be defeated in a negative way. I think psychological defeat can be such a healthy tool, learning from failures, all that kind of thing. But we want it to be proper, because hidden within it, before the 8 days, and afterwards is what we call the post-traumatic growth cycle, pre, during, and after. So you have like a pain point or trauma, or you learn what the cycle kind of looks like, which basically is checking in with yourself, understanding how you fit into your environments. And then we don't give them these tools up front to find healthy environments on the other end, because most of the men that we pick know how to do this already intuitively or from self-mastery. And then they cycle into the 8 days, they get their pain points or traumas. And then afterwards, we start to introduce some more coping mechanisms. Again, we kind of stack the odds by picking people who already have really healthy coping mechanisms. But they're the ones who, it gets harder, right? As you climb the ladder, it gets harder to find those things that induce those moments, those catalysts of growth, of opportunity. And then afterwards, of course, we're forming a network. It's a slow burn right now. What we were counting on was launching Serial 2 in May and topping up those numbers. And then that's when we start answering those questions more deeply about, solving world problems, all that kind of thing, which I can get into a little later. And then we didn't have it in place for Serial 1. What we wanted to start to develop, it's a program called the Trials. And the Trials is based on these 3 mythic trials that basically overlay on rites of passage, kind of hero's journey in a way, just in more simpler terms. And it's a 12-week program where people go through and they deep dive their psychology and their physiology. And we inject what I think some of the heaviest hitting contemplation tools out there, put it all together, laid out in an e-course, nicely roadmapped to get to the end point of yourself in a way. So what I mean by that is it's very hard to guide people and not give them the answers, right? Like a Zen master, with koans and parables and stuff. You don't want to give the answer because that's your answer. It's not their answer. Everyone's truth's a little bit different or vastly different. So how do you nudge these people along a path to get to the end where they're like, okay, I can program myself physiologically and psychologically. I understand my value sets more and my characteristics, and just helps that next step of not letting life kind of happen to you, but you make life happen. In a broad brush kind of terms.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I want to dive more into the trials and sort of the deeper stuff this is trying to unpack, but just on the mechanical level, before we leave the process, I guess a couple things there. So it's an amazing package that you've got around the experience itself. And what do I want to ask? 8 days. So just on a couple mechanical things. So what's the magic to 8 days? And is that derived from sort of the selection process in the elite units in Canada and kind of the British units, or how does that compare or contrast to American SF, or if somebody in particular is familiar with the Navy and BUDS process?
So I guess I'll give up my secrets. No. So it's derived from many ancient traditions that are out there, just from my own personal interest and research sake that I've dove into, like I mentioned about rite of passages, all those kinds of ceremonial things that have been done more traditionally in antiquity times. And then, if you look at selections, things of that nature, there's usually, some of them are longer, but there's usually that kind of heavy point, right? Like a BUDS or something, you got your hell weeks and all that kind of stuff. And there's a reason for that, because those who get over the hump, unless you break their body, by beating them with a bat or something, they're probably going to get through almost 100%. So it doesn't need to be 365 days of straight selection style mentality. You can also learn so much from the observations, the behavioral observations in that time frame. I guess kind of like between you and me, though, 8 days, we started on day 0. So day 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 8 days, it's a day over a week. People are used to thinking in the week. You know, you come into this world and you inherit the culture of the Monday through Friday and then Saturday, Sunday, 7-day week, the Gregorian calendar. And, you know, that number 7 days really is ingrained in us. So to be kind of like, okay, I got to make it to 8 days, it just plays a little on the psychology when we're already playing a lot on their psychology. So it's just another little, it might be a little weight, but it's a little something on top of all the other things, right? And then day 0, it does this thing where, you know, 2 days, 3 days in, we're like, you're just at day 2, you know, and it makes it sound like it's, your brain's kind of like, okay, it's just day 2. Oh God, I got so much more to go with the 8 days. You know, it starts to play, especially in that really tired mind frame. It doesn't do that to everyone, but there is that significance. It gives us enough time to observe. It does play a little on their psychology because it's a little bit out of the norm.
Right. Gotcha. Okay. Well, I won't ask for all the the secret sauce, but that makes a ton of sense. There's so much you can play with there. I did want to just put this out there, and not trying to put you on the spot or do this in a way that's weird for these other guys, but I mean, the process, just by all the stuff you described and the type of people that will be positioned for that, it's going to be a relatively small group by definition. However you want to say that, elite or just a subset. And as we get back to the trials, maybe that's a bit of a more scalable or broad group. But what I wanted to ask on the process, so there is out here in San Diego, there's a group called SEAL Fit. Coach of mine, retired Navy SEAL Commander Mark Devine, and out of a Navy contract he had at one point that was designed. So I know you got one of your business partners is an ex SEAL guy. They had a contract at one point out here, these SEAL Fit guys, to help train young men going into that to try to deal with the attrition issue and get a higher success rate. Out of that, Mark's created this commercial business, and he's got these different boot camp events. And the big one that came out of what he had done with the government contract, he calls kokoro, which he said is a Japanese word for heart, mind, warrior, which I found interesting, is something you use in your material, the heart, mind, warrior. That kokoro camp that he calls it is something like a 50, 52, 54 hour crucible, no sleep, nonstop. And from what I understand, he designed that time frame. I think in the spirit of what you're saying is that for those guys that went through BUDS, there's sort of those first few days, 2 to 3 days, that if you get over that hump, then you got a good chance of making it the rest of the way. And so I think that's the sweet spot he designed into this thing. He doesn't seem to have as much explicit psychology and the upfront and the follow-up process for participants in that. But what he says, and talked to some people who have gone through it, is that there is a self-realization process. You meet yourself for the first time, is what he says. And so I think a number of people who have gone through that have had such an amazing experience. Look back on it and kind of say, like, invaluable, but not sure I would ever do it again. But as you also, I think, alluded to, is people continue to look for ways to try to challenge themselves. So, okay, I've got that now. What else am I going to do to grow? Those guys like to say that's the hardest civilian training available anywhere in the world. So I guess this is where I'll put you on the spot a little bit. Would the process potentially be the next level if some of the guys that I know looking for that next thing might want to reach out and see what you're all about?
Well, let me just back up here and I just like to fill in a couple things. So I like how you said subset, because I don't like using the word elite because it puts a caste system or something on it. And that's not what I'm talking about. Like you said, a subset. And the subset's broad in a lot of ways. It's not like, oh, you only make this much money. And the idea is to get really what psychologists would call fully functioning humans, as many of them together as possible at different age brackets, at different experiences, with different backgrounds, different ethnicities, et cetera, et cetera. And then you mentioned about, Mark mentions heart and mind. That's like a real British term when it comes to working with indigenous forces and stuff like that. But I think he's probably referring to it in terms of a fully intelligent human being, one that uses their intellect, but also learns to really use their intuition and listen to what their body's saying and moving forward. And then the post-traumatic growth cycle, like you mentioned, if you are growth-minded and you have an exploratory nature, you're going to probably constantly be seeking those things out. They'll change as you mature, right? You know, in action and action, and where do you want to do it? Where do you put it? You vector it with more purpose. But yeah, it gets harder to find growth cycles that really actually push you into growth, force you to. Every moment of difficulty, you either overcome it, step past it, or you don't, right? And that's the idea of these kinds of programs, that you're constantly facing them. So as far as more difficult, I really, and I know, you know, in a fun way, it's like kind of fun to be like us and them here. They are different. I know that for a fact, because last year we had some past Kokoro people. One of our cadre worked Kokoro, or at least worked in this SEAL fit realm. Don't quote me on which part, but I know he worked under that umbrella with Mark. I do agree about the few hours, you know, the crucible, the destruction. Also, it fits over a weekend nicely, which, you know, most people can get off. You know, there's a lot of reasons behind that. We don't handhold and we don't stop. The words that are used to describe cadre is that they are relentless and unremorseful, and it doesn't stop. It's just doing that in a healthy, growth-minded way has some nuances. So, you know, just if you think about it, 8 days over instead of a couple days, you know, there is that. I won't say one's harder than the other because I haven't done Kokoro, so I can't speak to that. I haven't even done the process. You know, I've done processes, so I can't speak to it in those terms. You're right. It'll only be ever at most 30 guys a year because of that. It basically goes back to a soft principle of, you know, quality over quantity. Basically, there is a 2-to-1 ratio for cadre to candidates, and I wouldn't want to dilute that anymore, just to make sure that all the behavioral observations are happening and that the program's being delivered in the right way. You know, the right moments, the right cues, the right timings are all being met, not just from a logistical standpoint, but from that psychological ratchet that we put on people. You know, I guess the only way to sort this out, Mike, would be you would have to go do Kokoro, and then you'd have to come do the process, and then you can let people know.
I like how you've turned that back on me. Maybe that's where we need to move on. Then I'll let you off the hook.
Well, I will say this, that something I believe in my heart, as you move, human beings have been creating selection programs for thousands of years. You know, you think pre-Spartan, Spartan, et cetera, et cetera. I just use Spartan because a lot of people are familiar with the Ogogi or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And then now here in 2020, the most modern, wealthy countries, their tier 1 units, their tier 2 units should be at the tip of that echelon, and their methods are very, very honed, right? And they're designed specifically to find characteristics, where I don't think Mark's necessarily doing that, and that's not what we're doing. We're not looking for characteristics, but we use all the tools to find those things, to relay them back onto other people and to push them and tweak those things, basically to help them develop their prefrontal cortexes better for certain situations.
Yeah, I think a lot about this. I mentioned my son, so he's 12. You know, as a father of a 12-year-old boy, I think a lot about these kind of things and how you can apply them for a young man early in life and give them a head start that, maybe we didn't have 20, 30 years ago. And just some things that are missing culturally that don't necessarily have to be always done through a 50-hour weekend or an 8-hour or 8-day week. As you mentioned, rites of passage, a tribal connection. And you said the obstacle is the way. So I'm a big Ryan Holiday fan, and he's turned me on to the Stoics. Maybe to say it in terms of something else I picked up on from you is constantly improving courage, or, you've said it in science terms, post-traumatic growth. And so for all of us that have that mindset, that want to challenge ourselves in different ways and develop, maybe let's pivot back to what you're doing with the trials, because this is something right here, right now. You opened applications today. It's starting soon, and I think you're doing some things with Jess and some others on the team called Robust Human Summit. So can you talk about that, please, and connect the two?
Yeah. Once again, though, if you don't mind, I'm going to back up. Just
sure.
You mentioned about kids. When it comes to rites of passage and stuff, the formula is separate, initiate, return, and it's basically the post-traumatic growth cycle, where you raise your kids, then you separate them from their worldview and their reality, and then you test it and you bend it. And that can be done with a fishing trip if you do it right. It doesn't have, like you said, it doesn't have to be some kind of special forces selection or some kind of boot camp or anything like that. It can be just a creative way to spend your time. And right now is a good time because we're on lockdown. So it's a good time for parents to work on their kids' psychology, if you will, with those similar tools. Because we're doing that with my niece and nephew, and we've started using a modified version of Maslow's hierarchy to start raising their consciousness and seeing how they fit in the world. And they're 5 and 7, and the returns we're getting on that is just amazing. And what we're doing is combining that with little adventures, little quests, little things like that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, we're all a bit outside of our comfort zones right now, and trying to figure it out. But yeah, I appreciate you backing up to that. Let's talk about that as much as you like. If I hear you the right way, the way I think of it is, I don't know, I'll take an example, and I love the connection to nature. So last summer, I took my son with a group of other dads and boys, and we spent a week. We were going to try to summit Mount Whitney in California. Ended up just, doing some day hikes and some fishing and camping for 5 days. But one, it was a connection to nature for an extended period of time that I don't think had ever had before. Just getting out of urban life and just being, boys being boys, throwing rocks and not having parents around telling them no, and those kind of limits, and figuring it out for themselves, and just being away from mama for 5 days. There was no cell service. And so for him, it was a bit of a rite of passage, something a little different and hugely enjoyable. And then, as you said, kind of the return, also brings you back to really appreciate what you have as well. So is that sort of the similar concept?
Yeah, well, for sure. So many things in there. Connection to nature, just getting out into those vibrations, getting out into those, nature gives off so many spores and pollens and things that we should absorb anyways, the bacteria for your biome that's out there. And then just that freedom, stepping away from the noise of society, and that it doesn't have to be dramatic. Like you said, you go out, basically what he was doing was creativity and free play, like you said, throwing rocks, hitting sticks, looking at things, testing his environment in a really healthy way, probably being a little bit uncomfortable if you're even in a tent. I mean, a tent and a sleeping bag is not like sleeping on a bed, right? Then you return home and you're like, oh, okay. Oh, hot water. That's great. Shower feels great. Oh, that's a comfy bed. And that goes back to the point of, like, it doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be like whatever the folks in Africa do, where they go out and have to kill a lion, as a rite of passage. And the Maasai, I think it is, Maasai or something like that. It doesn't have to be that dramatic. It can fit into our reality here in the West, right?
Yeah, I think there's all kinds of big and small ways to play with that. The other way that we've played with it is that we've been fortunate enough to be able to take our son on a good number of international trips. So he's been a number of places already early in his life, and we don't just go and enjoy, and of course we do, but I like to talk about that as well. As I think every time we come back with, because you got different cultures, you got I've been places where you've got squat toilets. Some of them are quite nice, some of them aren't, but those kind of things.
Yeah, how does it get up the walls?
That's always been a mystery. But you come home and you take some things away that were different, that you really liked and enjoyed. Maybe it was a culture or a style of clothing or music or food, but then you also come back with some things that you go like, well, I now I really appreciate something at home that I took for granted before.
Yeah, to me, it's all about intentionally building their perspectives, a real intentional method of helping develop their psychology. We're really good. School's very good at linear learning. It does help place you into different circumstances and all that, but it doesn't, at a very important time, childhood, specifically target those kinds of things. And this isn't like to go off against schooling or anything. It's the importance of parents doing those kinds of things with their kids, taking that time, the development, it pays dividends. It's unbelievable right now how conceptual even my 5-year-old niece can think, where, like I said, we're doing a modified Maslow's hierarchy, and the things that she's able to grasp that most people say, kids can't, and that's why it's avoided for a while. It's been unbelievable. And it's helped so much when they're having little meltdowns, when their realities are being tested, when they don't understand their emotions. It's given them tools to talk about their emotions so they can express them, which is crucial. When it comes to the post-traumatic growth cycle, emotional expression is key. That gives you the language to make sense of your world, your new reality. So like you said, you go on a trip, you step into this new reality, and then you talk about it. And then the child can decide, that fits me, or that doesn't fit me. But at least they understand it too, right? When it comes to later on, when it's him interacting with other people, or he's receiving information from, say, like the news sources or whatever, and he's like, no, I was there. My perspective is this. And it usually leads to a healthier outcome, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of us figure out parenting as we go, but it's amazing how much more children understand and are capable of communicating back if, than we might assume, or that we allow them.
Yeah, I have a bit of a theory, and it's not like a theory to stand on, but kids come out pretty much self-actualized. It's not until we, culture in concepts of low self-esteem, and we flush out lots of their creative drives and their free play drives, and how they interact with people. We were starting to discuss things with them about other races, ethnicities, and it's amazing how much they see the difference, but they don't see it like we do, right? They haven't had time to develop those stereotypes and biases, and stereotype doesn't necessarily mean something bad. It just means a shortcut in your mind. It's just building them up in potentially a healthier way, because in this case, we're kind of sitting on one side of the fence saying, okay, here's some tools that we wish we would have had, but it doesn't mean they're going to stand the test of time, but they're pretty good. And yeah, they're already there. If you really, not all, of course, everyone's circumstances are different, but if you look at what it takes to prop up those levels, their sleep needs are usually met, their food, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're giving them their tools so they can come back to us and be like, I need a little bit more sleep. I need a little bit less sleep. I should be eating this kind of food instead of this kind of food. And, putting away the junk food on their own, all the impulse control that starts to come from it, because they're starting to get words, and with the words, they're able to associate that with their reality so much better.
That's amazing. Yeah, we come out pretty good until we screw ourselves up. If you just take like a tiny example of that I was talking to somebody about the other day, and I've said it before, even on this podcast, is like, I'm damn near 50 years old, and I'm just now learning to breathe the right way and to harness different breathing techniques as tools.
Yeah,
Whereas, we
amazing,
all came
right?
out of the womb knowing how to breathe properly, physically at least.
Yeah, or move our bodies to maintain big flexible movements, and then we kind of, oh, now we're sitting in a chair with our whole shoulders hunched and we're hacking away at a laptop, undoing all those things. You mentioned the trials earlier. It Part of its architecture is those kinds of things. So we reintroduce breath, breathing patterns, different breathing patterns, posture, how to use those two, because those are really important because they're hooked up to your sympathetic nervous system and they're really good to help lower anxiety. They're one of our only intentional shortcuts that we can do, one of a few, and then, like I said, physical movement designed for endurance, strength, perseverance, the whole gamut of what I think you'd want to build it so you can maintain a long time. Because it's great to be a power lifter. I love lifting a barbell. It's just now I have a dislocated shoulder, my knees and stuff are starting to get sore. Now I got to really look into the longevity portion of it. And that's what we do. We show different ways to maintain your flexibilities and your longevities in different ways. So you can cycle in and out of it too, right? The body adapts pretty good. So, okay, I'm going to work on endurance style training, and then I'm going to work on strength style training, flexibility or longevity. And then similar, we do that in the trials with the psychological portion.
So that's thanks for bringing us back to that. A lot of us have more time on our hands right now as adults. There's still a lot more to learn physically. So you're talking physically, physiologically, psychology there, but those things can also lead us to those deeper things you mentioned on developing our emotional awareness and expression and intuition. So the trials, 12 weeks, hosted remotely for those of us who have some time and have that connection we might want to make right now. This starts May 1st, is it? Tell me a little bit more about who this is aimed for, how to qualify or apply, and what it looks like May 1st forward.
All right. So what we do is we have the trials. Like I said, it's based on some ancient techniques. It's based on some modern techniques. It's a group of us who collaborated and put this program together. The gist of it, while we were creating it, like I said, it was a phase 4 product for the process, meant to be done afterwards to culminate everything. And what we did is we said, okay, we need to bring these methods to the masses. With the process, it has a price tag on it, and not everyone's able to make that, but it doesn't mean that they don't want to go down the road of self-mastery, right? And we didn't want to limit it that way. So we created this program, much more affordable. Like you said, it's online, delivered remotely. So it brings a lot of flexibility because nowadays a lot of people are working from their laptops from different places. Yes, at this exact moment, COVID's got us locked down a little. But generally, people are on the move much more. They need more flexibility. Life's busy, So yeah, we distilled a lot of the lessons out of the process, a lot of our methods as individuals, as part of the cadre, as our collective group, and put them together to create the trials. Right now, it's mostly men, and we are working on trials for women because women, although they could go through this program because psychological development and physiological development, there's some differences, but it works. It's not a gender specific program. It just seems like we're attracting a lot of men. And for women, they're also, their mothers or Crohn's. So we wanted to tailor it a little bit more. So that program will be out within, I think, about a month and a half or so. But again, it's not targeting just men. That's not our goal. It just seems to be a lot of men are hungry for this kind of method right now. So guys who are at any stage of their lives, we have guys who were on 8 years of therapy, not really going anywhere, criminal activity, not the best at home life, but they're there and they're like, man, I want something more, or I want not more as in abundance, more just, I know there's more for my mind to do, but I've been trapped in these horrible psychological patterns for years and I don't know how to break out of it. And this isn't a bash against therapy, but if a therapist heals you in one day, he doesn't do so well. So I think the talk therapies take a little too long. I think we can deliver more punch. And then we have other guys who are, captains of industry who are just looking for that next thing. Because as you start to get into those realms, you find a 0.05% way to change your body, your movement, your outlook. That's gold. That gets hard to find. It's not like being a young man where, holy moly, there's all kinds of pearls of wisdom I can hoist aboard. So they come into this program. We have a Slack group where we get together, and I don't want to say discuss ideas. What happens is every week they have a check-in. There's an accountability portion to it. So you check in to our group. People are free to comment because none of us are as smart as all of us, right? We don't pretend like we have a monopoly on knowledge at all. In fact, I learn a ton from these guys because we all have such vast life experiences. So you go through, you're introduced to, like I said, I think the most robust contemplative techniques there are right now. And contemplation is just, bridging the gap between mental concentration and meditation and adapting that for your body. So it starts off where you learn to control your thoughts a little bit more. And with contemplation, it's like any practice. It takes a long time. It's, there'll be guys who are at different levels, but it's a practice. You don't just show up and do it perfectly. So you start off there, and then you go down your two paths. Like I said, physiologically and psychologically, and you start to tear apart your mind and start to tear apart your body, and you reset a little bit, and you develop, you learn, you educate yourself on all these things. Like I said, you're going to reset your breathing patterns, your posture awareness, all these kind of bullet point things amongst all the other knowledge that we will deliver. Then you get to week 4, and then you're given a challenge. And the challenge is scored just kind of, for that fun, see where we stack in the order of things. And then what it does is it brings together what you've been learning physiologically, psychologically, and contemplatively. And then we give you a problem to solve, and you go do it. Then you move into the next 4 weeks, and then another challenge. And the idea here is, as you go down the rabbit hole, you kind of master thought. You won't master it in the 12 weeks, but you're learning to master thought, then emotion. And then somewhere, around, if you look at the brain, you move from the neocortex areas down to the older areas, and then eventually to the brainstem, where it jumps between mind and body, where, some people hypothesize I exist. You can actually start to really check in with your body. So the idea here is you're programming yourself for yourself by the time you master these techniques. Zen masters are excellent at it. Not a lot, but some yogis, they're really good at getting down and listening to those synapses deep down. And then it kind of brings it full circle. That last challenge is something that you set and dictate, but you have to put it out into the world. So we hope you stay accountable once you kind of put it out there. And then, like I said, you learn to cycle the PTG cycle in a deliberate way. So what happens is you can do it quicker, and you can do it with little things. And once you're just aware of certain cycles, it just helps you program them a little better. And along the way, we have our Slack community, and people start using really great, intentional, beautiful language there. The gist is emotional awareness and expression. So there's a lot of other little things in there, stream of consciousness journaling, super powerful tool. Meditation practices that we give all the tools we can possibly give you, along with practices, and breaking them down so that when you show up and you're like, okay, week 1 accountability, what did I learn about service versus sacrifice? Okay, when you put it in there, people give you some thoughts, and not pushback or but sometimes it's good to challenge ideas too, right? And, well, okay, have you thought about this? Have I thought about that? And it's really great. And the thing is as you use more revolutionary language, your brain starts to work more evolutionary. It gets stronger. You get new words, you get new tactics. And we've had really, really great results. We had a beta and then a cohort 1. We're about to move into cohort 2, just because we don't want to have like 100 people going through week one at the same time, because as the cadre checking in and stuff like that, it would be just unmanageable. And I think if you dilute it too much, it'll lose its potencies. So yeah, we're about to move into cohort 2 and May 1st. And we are constantly evolving this stuff. It seems to have really great results for guys who have PTSD symptoms, people who want to just reprogram their value sets. And, I'm assuming, Mike, it happened to you at a certain point. You're like, at some point in your life, you're like, wow, I'm in charge of here. I'm capable to do what I want to do, how I want to do. I don't need to be in these certain boxes, or I can create these certain boxes. We'd call it adding lenses or removing lenses, and adding veils and removing veils, and just building up that perspective.
Yeah, no, it sounds amazing. I love how you say none of us are smarter than all of us. I find that a lot of guys I know, and maybe, maybe I'll just say it as myself. There's a lot of guys from my, maybe my niche in business who have gone a route that was just sort of prescribed. You do this and you do this and you go to school and then you figure out what you want to do and you go into a career, and in a way that's sort of easy because you're just kind of bouncing between somebody else's bumpers that they've put on this journey. But then you get to a place, and maybe it comes back to some of the Maslow's hierarchy, where you have an opportunity to step back and you go, okay, fine, I succeeded in that. And I've taken care of responsibilities to family, to finance, whatever those things might be. Now I have more time, more freedom to contemplate what's going on in the next season of life, and maybe ask or challenge some of those bigger questions about breaking out of maybe what was prescribed, really doing that deeper work on, what is my purpose, or what is it I want to leave behind, or what is it that I want to provide value in doing or in serving over the next, kind of X. And so different ways to get there, but yeah, certainly I've been on some of that journey, and it was one reason I was really excited to learn more about what you have going on with the trials. Is I think some people will hear about that and just be kind of all in. For somebody who wants to maybe hear more, we're limited on how much you can talk about here today on time, but is the Robust Human Summit that you're going to host a way that people would get a deeper look at you and the rest of the cadre and what the trials would look like?
Yeah. So the Robust Human Summit, a lot of people have been reaching out to us for information in this interesting time on survival and thriving. So we decided to put together a program that kind of covers just about all your base needs. So sleep, water, food, movement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I won't brush through some of it. Interpersonal relationships, dynamics with children. We got about 10 different categories with people specializing in each one. And it's going to be delivered in a way where, okay, in survival, this is what you need. This is how you do it. Here's some tips and tricks. Take water, for example. What is water? Why do we need water? How does it, et cetera, all the kind of science behind it. Why is it important to us? Okay, how do I get it in a survival situation? And then what's my best practices to thrive? Even in a normal world, right? Drinking certain water is not good for you. But there's things you can do. So it's kind of that information all the way down to movements, and we're trying to cover as much as we can on the base needs of human beings. So that'll be available through the specialforcesexperience.com or the Special Forces Experience on Instagram if people want to check it out. And I like to think of it like this. Open-mindedness is one of the key traits to growth, because your mind is open, your ego is allowing space to accept new information. And if you find yourself hesitant, come check this out, because it's really good stuff. It's nice. Really great. It's really got good truth and intention behind it.
And is that coming up here pretty quick? Because I know the trials start May 1. So is Robust Human Summit in parallel or preceding that?
I'll be honest here, Mike. I don't take care of the marketing, so I don't know the exact how that's going to work.
Okay.
That's my wife who handles that stuff, and she's not close by for me to ask. Last little while, we've actually started transitioning to homesteading lifestyle. So I've been spending a lot of time on that, along with like managing the other business aspects of my life and et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of got like chickens and rabbits and goats on the mind, and a little less about those dates. It'll be available. Oh, you know what? That's not true. Tomorrow? Is today Wednesday? Whatever Wednesday is, the first set will be launched. And then each day there'll be another one available for people to find.
Okay. No worries. I will certainly confirm that with you and Jessica, and we'll get links to all this stuff up for this episode. I want to get it. I'm going to rearrange some things and get it out right away so that people can find out about this if they're tuned in and don't already know about you and where to find you guys. I mean, you got so much crazy stuff going on in your background and what you've learned and what you're bringing to bear. It's funny, as I was reading your resume, it reminded me of this conversation I used to have with a buddy in the work world, in the civilian work world, who came from a tier 1 unit in the U.S. military, and we'd always, great guy, we'd always invite him to go do stuff, and like, hey, a group of us are going to go get scuba certified this weekend. You want to come along? Yeah, I used to deep dive with a rebreather all the time. Like, all right, we're going to go to the climbing gym. It's going to rain this weekend. Let's go to I used to ice climb in Alaska. I'm tired of that. It's like kind of been there, done everything. And that's what I felt like when I was reading your thing. But you're so deep in so many ways beyond just the physical experience. So I want to tap into that a little bit before we have to break, Jeff, and come back to one place we started on this mission you have for maybe catalyzing, inspiring, leading, and bringing men together to solve some of the world's bigger problems. Mm-hmm. So one question I have for you, I recently had a guest on called Ryan Mickler, if you're familiar with him at all, Order of Man. He's really tapped into kind of this manhood movement, and he likes to ask, what does it mean to be a man? I'll spin that a little bit. What does it mean to be a good man?
Yeah, that reminds me, being a good man and being great at being a man kind of time frame. I guess for me, it boils down to a word: integrity. Integrity right down to your atomic structure outwards, into everything you do, into your relationships, and, living it authentically. I always feel like, God, don't ask me that, because what being a good man to me is so different than other people. Obviously it overlaps. And I live such a different life, and I have different things afforded to me and abilities and capabilities that some might not have. But I would say, integrity for me is a big one. Being integral in everything, in my word, in what I do, being that rock that my wife might need. Not that she's not my rock sometimes, but giving her that space to be her best self, and being intentional behind that, because there's a difference between being stubborn and having, integrity laced with humility and honor. A word that I feel it's kind of long since passed, and, people, they're honoring a lot of things that I don't believe they should. That's my own personal opinion. I think that if people revisited that word, what do I honor? Where's my line in the sand that I really have? And not just drawing it, because it's one thing to just come to that conclusion, draw it, but understand where you came from, the environment that shaped you, the cultures that shaped you, and where you want it to go before you do that. And then, what's a healthy flexibility in that? Because like I said, open-mindedness, exploratory natures, adventure, those, in order to entice those properly, you can't just be rigid in your position. You need to have those flexibilities, and then balancing those two things.
I really like that. It is crazy how you get down this, I think you said rabbit hole maybe early on, is you start unpacking these things and, okay, where did that belief come from? And then, you start backing that up, or digging deeper, and can really sort of question and put it back together in a way that you choose, that you form for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So let me throw one other word at you. It's something you've commented on, that there is strength in vulnerability. That seems to be vulnerability seems to be a polarizing word with men. Some say like, no, that's crap. It's weakness, and other people say, no, there's strength in that. So tell me more about strength and vulnerability.
Yeah, I guess men, I'll say men in particular, need to heal their relationship with a lot of words we have out there. A lot of words have been tarnished, and vulnerability is one of those words. Vulnerability doesn't necessarily mean meek. That image of tears and, slouched shoulders and, um, it just means you're able to put yourself in a position to expand and adapt and grow. And you have to put your ego on the line a lot of the times. You don't, I don't think anyone has it figured out. And if you look at, if you timeline that, well, it's going to change all the time, right? And you have to be open, vulnerable to little nudges, because sometimes it doesn't feel good, right? That's the idea of the ego. He puts up his defense mechanisms. He's like, no, I don't want to change, and makes it painful, because our psychological systems are connected with our physiological systems, and it doesn't feel good. It literally doesn't feel good. The more you practice it, though, the better you become at it. And, that's not about like hoisting aboard every opinion, thought, and piece of advice that people have. It's just about being, okay, let me actually hear the words you're saying, or let me actually see what you're doing and trying to express, bring it into my mind and see how I can incorporate that in a healthy way. So in that, I would say heal the relationship with vulnerability, because I'll say this, like I did all the stuff that a lot of people will be like, oh yeah, that's real manly and stuff like that. And what people don't know, once you climb certain echelons, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to put yourself in positions where you're going to fail to learn. You don't want to do that on the mission, right? Or the important tasks that your government deems, or whatever it is in life. That's not when you want to do. You want to do it before there's real consequences. And remain flexible with it. It's your relationship with vulnerability.
Yeah, I think that's really part and parcel. Is may not be comfortable, but it's almost kind of the point, is getting being willing to do those uncomfortable things because of the growth opportunities that are there. I've had another friend of mine sort of half jokingly comment, like, hey, you're like a year into doing this podcast, and you started with this self-mastery concept that's a journey you've been on, but like, why is your podcast just full of Navy SEALs and religious guys? Well, that wasn't necessarily by design, but it's those seem to be a couple domains where people get tested into, or evolved into, or however it gets there, of some of these deeper contemplations that we can take forward and apply in a lot of places in life.
I think I have. This is like, we could have 100 podcasts on this topic, but it boils down to one thing: culture. Culture creates the brain creates culture, and it's this symbiotic relationship that just keeps cycling back and forth, back and forth. Epigenetics, neuroscience is all proving this. And the reason these groups do is because they have really strong cultures, especially in the military world, in the tier 2s and 1s. They remain flexible and adaptable. They have to be, right? The quote unquote enemy is constantly changing. So it creates this culture of this relentless pursuit of excellence, of changing, of like keeping your eyes open, your attention systems, like your articulated activating system, and those systems used to like soaking up information and taking really good, not just going on autopilot and like, soaking up all these useless bits and bytes, but looking for those details, those things to focus your attention on that help you adapt and grow. And then with religions, and actually in the special forces realm, there's also a laid out path, that makes it pretty, okay, if I'm walking this way on this path, I'm going to get to that point B. You know what I mean? It's laid out. They're tried, true, and tested algorithms for moving towards transcendence, which is the ultimate goal of something like self-actualization. And a big portion of it is a faith of some sort, where you don't put yourself at the center of the universe. You're part of the universe, especially in religions, but also like in the military world. You're part of a bigger organization that believes in serving your country, your flag, your nation, or generally the good ideals of mankind, humankind in general, right? Whether it's at home or abroad.
Yeah, I think two things you mentioned there that triggered some thought or some understanding for me is when I study those things. So I study them, try to learn from them, haven't lived them like you guys have. But one is suffering. There's some element of suffering in both, and you've said that part of what you do is helping people understand the power of suffering for a tool in transcendence on the physical and mental planes. And then I'd also say intentionality. So there are a lot of pursuits in life or careers that don't require as much intentionality or intentional focus on these kind of questions. But in organizations like religions, like military, a lot of time and study and money and investment has gone into how to build those cultures in effective ways that develop people.
Yeah. The way we differentiate, we say conscious suffering and unconscious suffering. Conscious suffering is just what it sounds like, right? You do it on purpose with intention, with as much knowledge and truth and tools as you have at that moment, because it's going to change, right? And that's what these units do. Religion is actually quite good at adapting in a lot of ways, even though a lot of the teachings are old. But you look at, like, say, Christianity, there's a lot of different books out there that have evolved with the times to come to where it is now. And then, like you said, unconscious suffering, there's a lot of places that they don't really, there's all kinds of psychology that goes behind it, like autonomy theories and all those things that they take away because they think that gets the most output. I disagree with that. I think any place that can give more autonomy to its employees from the ground up I can't see it not doing better, but that's just me. But yeah, the gist is suffering. That's another word that we could heal a relationship with. Suffering, it's not fun. You're outside of your comfort zones. But yeah, you can do it intentionally. And one of the driving forces behind that is our brains run on this thing called terror management theory, which is this constant fear of death that's deep down, right? Your body's trying to maintain homeostasis in this, quote unquote, hostile world. Even though right now, like, I'm sitting on a cushioned chair in my log cabin, I don't need food, I don't need nothing, but deep down inside, those cycles are still running. And, the more you suffer and overcome, the more you step into the unknown, which is the antithesis of death, right? Like, that's not the antithesis, but like the epitome of it is the unknown. We don't know. The more you step into those unknowns and cycle through, the easier it becomes. And that's another thing about the cultures of the military and, some divisions of religion, like the Templars and stuff like that, is that suffering to transcend. And then once you have that formula and you repeat it, because you could fall back into patterns of remaining in your comfort zones, you eventually come to accepting death as much as you can. You don't welcome it in, it's kind of, you picture like the samurai who he's been defeated. He's ready to die honorably, kind of that. I think you can achieve something like that without, nobody, I'm not saying you should want to die or anything weird like that, just a deep acceptance of it and understanding that those routines are running. It's not until you quiet the mind in some very interesting ways, long duration fasts, isolation, silent retreats, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that you start to tap in. And that's what I was talking about, that third level of contemplation deep down where your base functions meet your brain, that you start to see, like, my body is telling me that I'm hungry all the time. Hunger alone, just one driving force. It's like, okay, gotta eat, but you don't see it until you quiet the mind. But then something really interesting happens. And there's been some really interesting studies done on this, is that the human brain, it's the big higher functioning portions of the brain are able to control so much of that. And that's where you can start to control downwards in a lot of ways. There's studies done, people living a whole year without food, we're starting to learn so much more about these base functions and how to change and control, if you will, or work with them, I guess is a better word.
Yeah, there's still so much more to learn. I know you got to run. I got to let you wrap up. We could talk about this stuff for a long, long time. So I got a lifetime. Exactly. I don't know if this can wrap it all up, or if this just will open up a whole nother future conversation, or maybe done through the trials. But what do you find? I mean, I think about this kind of with the kind of right now, mostly guys that you find are working with you. What holds most people back? Is there something universal and that might be discovered through something like the trials or the process?
So it's, I guess, scientifically proven that people have a fear of growth. And I think that fear of growth, this is like a hypothesis of mine, is attached to that terror management, those cycles of the fear of the unknown, fear of the unknown, fear of the unknown. And the key is, don't people, you sit at home and you're like, oh man, I want a giant grandiose idea, whatever, insert it there. And that's daunting. But you could start small, go put yourself in a small situation that puts you out of your comfort zone. Like, start small and then add to it and read, learn, develop, all the things that you should be doing. But there's actually, now it's proven that people they have a fear of growth. And I think, be aware of how much your environment, I have an equation that's kind of off a guy named Lewin, and its expression, behavior is a function of personality and environment. At the SFE, we say personality plus environment equals behavior. You can rejig it however you want. But if you look at how much your environment impacts your behavior and then programs your personality, put yourself in those environments, those sensory inputs that are going to encourage you to be out of your comfort zone. And that's what growth is. And then you come back and then, you talk about your experience.
Incredible. I'm super excited about the stuff you guys are doing. I don't know how soon you're going to see me at Kokoro or the process, but I think you may see me applying for the trials. I'm amazed at what you guys are doing. I knew a lot coming into the conversation, Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
But an hour later, so much more kind of mind blown and want to keep learning from you. So I really appreciate you taking time today. And I know people are really going to appreciate this, but something like 12 weeks with you and your cadre sounds like a great next step to get more.
Yeah, awesome. I look forward to everyone that is willing to take that step, and super just a lot of gratitude, Mike, for having me on. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all the kind of people fighting the good fight, if you will.
No, I really appreciate you, Jeff. Really powerful and insightful stuff. Thanks so much for making the time and coming on.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Yeah, great stuff from Jeff Depatie, and hearing a little bit about what he and the team have going on. Look, if you are maybe that really subset of guys that's carved out for something like the Special Forces experience and looking for what may be one of the tougher civilian challenges out there, if not then check them out. I've got links to all this stuff in the show notes on the website to the episode, which you can find at manofmastery.com/051 for episode 51, manofmastery.com/051. Or you can go hit Instagram at Special Forces Experience if you want to check out Jeff and team there on Instagram, or just hit his website directly, thespecialforcesexperience.com, where you can also link to the trials. And I would, for everybody, go check this out. Young, old, man, woman, whatever it might be. This isn't 8 days in the wilderness, but the trials applications for that are open now. And this kicks off May first, 12 weeks. There is the live and the interactive component to it, but it is also self-paced. So that one is very, very accessible in terms of finance and people in different positions in life. But the same idea of ultimately, as Jeff says, transcendence in mind and body and spirit. So go check that out and learn more about Jeff and Jess and the SFE cadre. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So have a great week. Again, stay safe out there and look forward to next week with you here again.